All right, Parker, what is a woman?
A woman is an adult human person that has a desire to be in accordance with a particular set of social and cultural norms that are typically associated with the female sex. Now, define a man. Define a man.
You're looking at one. XY chromosomes in a
Okay, but
male.
does God the Father have XY chromosomes?
Okay.
Following the assassination of conservatist influencer Charlie Kirk in September 2025, the natural assumption was that it was at the hands of a left extremist. It felt like a reasonable deduction, but then something really weird happened. A massive conspiracy was promoted by the right in which the suspect was transgender. I mean, they went absolutely buck wild with this claim. First, they claimed that the bullet casings had transgender messagings engraved on them. Then they attempted to pin it on a transgender woman in Washington with faulty evidence. When it was revealed that the killer was a cis white guy named Tyler Robinson, they claimed that his roommate was transgender and turned Tyler into a terrorist. Transgender rights are an extremely hot topic in politics, and the discourse has only gotten worse over the years. Despite trans people having nothing to do with it, Charlie Kirk's death has put this discourse at an all-time high. Common anti-trans rhetoric includes, but is not limited to, they are mentally ill and delusional, they are infringing on your rights, they are mutilating children, and you can't change your gender. And hearing all this shit just bothered me to no end. Both my family and I have always been left-leaning, and growing up, transgender people never really bothered me. I want to say I learned about their existence in middle school when I started hanging around social spaces on the internet, such as the Undertale fandom and Terraria community forums. My reaction to their existence can be summed up as follows. Oh, there's people who were born as one gender, but identify as another. I didn't know about this. Good for them. And I've only grown more tolerant as I continue to socialize and even make friends with people who are transgender. But for the past few months, the weight of the discourse surrounding trans people has been extremely crushing and stressful for me. The continued bigotry of transphobes was seriously messing with my head. And at some points, some of the things they said made sense on paper. If I found myself questioning my stance because of a bunch of drivel online, then I knew something was seriously wrong. Ultimately, I came to a realization. I was not educated enough to call myself a trans ally, so I sought to correct that. For the past few weeks, I read, I researched, I consumed content, I doom-scrolled, I did everything I could to put my anxiety to rest. I wanted to know where I truly stood. Was I living in a left-wing echo chamber, or was my intuition correct to emphasize transgender people? While I sincerely hope that the points made in this video can empower the trans community at large, this video is directed at those who currently feel uncomfortable towards trans people and serves as a genuine attempt to alleviate their worries by clearing up misinformation and putting things into perspective. When I became skeptical, I responded by doing research and educating myself. And if others even put in even a fraction of the effort and independent thought that I did, they'd arrive at the same conclusion as me. My goal is to communicate two main things. The first is clarity on what trans people actually are. The second is why you shouldn't be afraid of them. I might say things that you feel like you've heard already, or things that'll make you want to leave a comment right away. But I ask that you hold off all of your thoughts until you have finished watching the video. There's a high likelihood that anything you're itching to say will have already been addressed later in the video, and I want you to understand why exactly I'm saying what I'm saying. So stay a while and learn why when I asked, are trans people valid? The answer was a decisive yes. I want to start by covering the single most common anti-trans rhetoric. It also happens to be the simplest anti-trans rhetoric. A man pretending to be a woman is still a man. A woman pretending to be a man is still a woman. The argument here is that trans people are rejecting reality by calling themselves something different from what they were assigned at birth. Something that is an undeniable fact. And you know what they say? Facts don't care about your feelings. But this argument is as dismissive as it is ignorant. For starters, trans people are perfectly cognizant of their biological sex. It's part of who they are, and that's okay. Sperm can carry either an X or Y chromosome. The egg, meanwhile, only carries an X chromosome. Upon fertilization, your biological sex is determined by the fusion of these two chromosomes. If a Y chromosome is present, the baby will be male. Otherwise, the baby will be female. There are rare cases where more than two chromosomes can be present, or where a chromosome can be swapped out for another during fertilization. This is how intersex people come to be, but that's another topic. The point is, yes, biological sex is absolute, and it's part of the challenge of being transgender. Being trans does not vehemently mean denying your biological sex, but rather navigating the role it plays in another concept deeply rooted in science: gender congruence. You'll learn that it's not wise to say facts don't care about your feelings when you neither understand the facts or the feelings. While the X and Y chromosomes directly affect your genitals, there exist other biological differences between most men and women, such as muscle mass, height, hormone levels, brain development, and sexual stimuli. But these traits do not always align with your biological sex. Gender congruence dictates what traits are most often found in men and what traits are most often found in women. It follows that gender incongruence refers to the level at which your being does not align with your biological sex. Gender incongruence is not as severe for some as it is for others. Women might be muscular while men might be weak. Women might be tomboys while men might be femboys. Women might be attracted to other women, while men might be attracted to other men. This is the foundation for gender nonconformity, where men or women exhibit traits that don't align with their gender, but they still align with their biological sex. Like me. But sometimes, gender incongruence is very high, and you share a large quantity of traits that align with the gender opposite of what you were assigned at birth. Such cases lead to gender dysphoria, where biological men don't feel comfortable identifying as male, and biological women don't feel comfortable identifying as female. Most often, this leads to identifying as the opposite gender, but in some cases, people may choose to identify as non-binary, and don't feel comfortable identifying with the gender binary. And this is where another huge issue lies. The amount of misinformation surrounding gender dysphoria is very alarming. And I'd like to snuff out another anti-trans rhetoric here and now. Transgender people are mentally ill, they need help accepting who they are. It is asinine to diagnose other people with mental illnesses, especially if you don't know what you're talking about. Gender dysphoria is not a mental illness, transgenderism is not a mental illness. Major medical organizations used to use the term gender identity disorder, but have stopped doing so for several years now. They realize that calling it a mental illness is extremely stigmatizing and fails to address what actually makes someone transgender. Homosexuality used to be a mental illness too, you know, and this was only remedied about 50 years ago. Every time some form of gender nonconformity appeared, society deemed it incorrect and chalked it up to a mental health problem. But professionals are finally realizing the concept of gender congruence. Men and women aren't always imprinted with the traits we have associated them with for centuries. And for trans people, every part of their being is wired to a specific gender except for their birth sex. This is not a mental illness. Society jumping to conclusions and failing to realize a problem goes far beyond gender nonconformity too. Want to know where else this happened? With autism. Decades ago, psychiatrists attempted to explain the cause for autism, which was fairly new at the time. They proposed the refrigerator mother theory, which claimed that autism was caused when children were raised by cold and neglectful mothers. This theory was extremely harmful to loving mothers nationwide. They developed extreme guilt, were humiliated by professionals, thought they had failed their children, and never got the support for their children that they actually needed. We understand autism much better now than we did decades ago, and now we're able to give those with autism the support and respect they deserve, while helping parents navigate the struggles of raising neurodivergent children. This is a great parallel to the history of understanding gender congruence. Regarding the treatment of gender dysphoria, allow me to answer a question that some of you might be asking. Why don't trans people learn to be comfortable with the gender they were assigned at birth? Why do they go through gender-affirming care and commit to transitioning? On paper, this seems like a reasonable inquiry. To make all these changes to your body would certainly seem more expensive than just coming to terms with your birth sex. So I got curious and looked up if such practices existed. That's how I learned about conversion therapy. Conversion therapy fucking sucks. Conversion therapy is essentially an effort to cure transgenderism and make a trans person see themselves as the gender they were assigned at birth. Put simply, it does not work. In fact, not only does it not work, but it also massively increases anxiety and risk of suicide. Even major health organizations strongly condemn conversion therapy, and if you've been paying attention so far, it's not hard to assume why. Under gender congruence, the more traits you have that don't match your biological sex, the more susceptible you are to gender dysphoria. It is impossible to convert someone's gender identity to their biological sex, because every trait associated with gender congruence is baked into each and every one of us. Attempting to fix that is denying people of who they really are. This is what so many people fail to understand. When trans people say they were born in the wrong body, they mean it. Are they pretending to be a different gender? No. Are they deluded about their gender because they're mentally ill? No. The fact of the matter is, no matter how many times you accuse transgender people of rejecting reality, they actually have the best understanding of gender than anyone else, backed by real science and major health organizations. Experienced gender identity is a real thing, and it is applicable to all of humanity. It just so happens that for most of us, our gender congruence is pretty tame, so our experienced gender identity ends up being the same as our birth sex. But for transgender people, it's different. Trans people do not simply decide that they want to be another gender. What actually happens is that at some point in their lives, they realize what gender they were always meant to be. As dictated by gender congruence, that is not a delusion. That is fact. If you don't believe in the word transphobia, then maybe try ableism on for size. Because while being transgender isn't a mental illness, it is still a form of biological dissonance. And to act like that needs to be fixed to align with your definition of normal is textbook ableism. The amount of harmful memes I've seen towards trans people that make fun of their appearance and how you can always tell when someone is trans is baffling. For starters, no, you cannot always tell when someone is trans. In fact, it's not uncommon for people to act this way towards cisgender people who come off as androgynous. I've even seen this happen to JK fucking Rowling. But there are tons of trans people who pass with flying colors, to the point where transphobes accidentally affirm their gender by saying, "You will never be," insert their gender identity here. I've had ADHD my whole life. I always struggled to keep up with my classes. That's why I've received numerous accommodations throughout my academic career. Stuff like copies of notes, extra time on tests, preferential seating. It wasn't always easy to get these accommodations. My mom fought tooth and nail to get me the support I deserved, especially back when ADHD wasn't as understood as it is now. Because that's what a well-adjusted society should strive to do. Accommodate those with genuine problems, be it mental or physical. I've had a few awful teachers who would say things like, "It's not fair to the rest of the class for you to be getting these advantages, you need to put in the effort that everyone else does." But that's just not how it works. Likewise, you can't just tell someone to ignore their gender incongruence and force them to identify with their birth sex. That's just not how it works. That, my friends, is why gender-affirming care is so highly regarded among medical professionals. When a mismatch between someone's gender and sex causes extreme distress, we help them achieve a state of being that better aligns with their gender. It doesn't affirm a delusion, it affirms the truth. There are many facets to gender-affirming care, such as hormone therapy and counseling for mental health problems that arise from gender dysphoria, but the part that makes people the most uncomfortable is the surgery. Or as you guys like to call it, mutilation. Top surgery among trans men is common, but strangely, I don't see a lot of people who are up in arms about that. Most of the discourse I see is in regards to bottom surgery among trans women. I don't know why a lot of you act like every trans woman endgame is to surgically remove their penis, but allow me to clarify something. Bottom surgery is not common. It's only about 10% of transgender women. Bottom surgery is a serious procedure with many repercussions to consider. It's not something a lot of trans women feel is necessary to help with their gender dysphoria. There are trans women who are at least interested in bottom surgery, but again, it's a delicate procedure and very few medical professionals are qualified to carry it out. It's also very expensive. And here's what baffles me the most. Why the hell do you care so much about what trans people do with their bodies? If that's what they need to help with their gender dysphoria, then that's what they need. Every major health organization understands this. And this is where another anti-trans rhetoric comes into play. Leave the children alone. I'm sorry, but what do you think gender-affirming care is, exactly? Do you think children just walk into hospitals and go, turn me into another gender? Do you think there's like a council of transgender people who seek out children and go, hey, we think you're actually this gender, you should get gender-affirming care? No, this was never about attempting to convince impressionable people that they're trans. Transphobia, however, seems very comfortable with trying to convince trans people that they're actually cis. Like I said earlier, gender congruence is applicable to all of humanity, no matter their age. If your child says they don't feel like a man or a woman, then there's a chance they're experiencing gender dysphoria. It's just like with sexuality. People don't choose who they're attracted to, they just are. But the thing is, while children may feel gender incongruence at an early age and show signs of it, they tend to not draw conclusions about themselves until at least their teenage years. So it's already incorrect to say that children are subjected to these procedures. Neither parents nor teachers will see their children be gender non-conforming and go, they must be trans, let's get them gender-affirming care. Only the individual will eventually be mature enough to realize if they're trans, if they're gay, or if they're simply gender non-conforming. And gender-affirming care has always been about assisting people that genuinely do feel gender dysphoria, completely of their own volition. It is a decision made with extremely careful consideration, determined only by an agreement between the individual and their guardians. And if you're still concerned about the whole surgery thing and what it means for minors, it is extremely rare for trans youth to undergo transitional surgery. Like I said earlier, surgeries are the most delicate part of gender-affirming care, and trans individuals don't always feel the need for it. Health professionals and the transgender community are very cognizant of the repercussions of surgery, and this applies 1,000-fold for minors. And regardless of the age demographics, if gender-affirming care can cease anxiety, depression, and suicidal thoughts in transgender people, and that just so happens to include surgery, then for all intents and purposes, it would be considered a life-saving surgery. Like, no one calls knee surgery mutilation, for Christ's sake. I do, however, wish to acknowledge a certain phenomenon. In some cases, there are people who have body dysphoria, or anorexia, yet mistake it for gender dysphoria. In these instances, an individual is self-conscious about their outward appearance and loathes their bodies, but assume the issue is that they're not the correct gender. I genuinely am sorry for anyone who may have gone through this. It's not fun at all, I should know. But luckily, there's a silver lining here. During gender-affirming care, these individuals are often able to realize the true source of their worries before any serious transitional procedures take place. The professionals tend to have a sharp eye for this stuff, and once the gender-affirming care has ceased, they understand themselves much better. To be clear, this does not invalidate transgender people or gender dysphoria in the slightest, and their problems are still very real. In fact, those with body dysphoria are some of the transgender community's strongest allies. Even when they learn that gender-affirming care is not for them, they understand the struggles of the transgender community and make no attempts to villainize them. Likewise, trans people genuinely don't want others to make a decision they'll regret, and strive to help people differentiate between body and gender dysphoria. It's even possible to have both. For as much as transphobes love to call trans people groomers, this phenomenon is just wholesome. Let's say you've made it this far and think I'm just yapping. You might be saying, sounds like a lot of hoopla to justify changing your gender. But that's the thing. Gender is a lot more complicated than people realize. That's not a narrative we made up. The science was never in favor of your argument, and that includes the opinions of large-scale health organizations. Men are born men and women are born women are very simple explanations that make so much more sense than everything I've said so far. Innuendo Studios has a really brief and informative video on this in his alt-right playbook series titled You Can't Get Snakes from Chicken Eggs. I'll link it in the description. The gist is that people find comfort in simple statements that are only true on a purely technical and surface level. They are overwhelmed by nuance and reject complexity that changes simplicity.
Yeah, you can only get a snake from a snake egg, but that snake is going to be a little different from its parents, and the next snake will be a little different from its parents, and you multiply that by a few million generations, and you might have something very different from that original snake. Maybe something with legs, or that can breathe underwater, or see better in the dark. And your aunt stares you dead in the eye and repeats as if you hadn't said anything, "You can't get snakes from chicken eggs."
And this is what transphobia boils down to. Men are born men, women are born women. Both statements are technically true, and anyone who thinks they can change their gender is delusional. But that's not how it works. I'm sorry, but the truth here is hardly up for debate. You can be a man or woman, regardless of your sex assigned at birth. Humanity is so attached to the idea that gender is this binary constant and vehemently rejects anything that says otherwise, despite the facts being in favor of trans people. They just can't fathom trans people actually being the gender they say they are because it's too complicated, even though it's 100% factual. So they just assume that it's an ideology meant to intrude on the rights of cis people. Here's something else that you're probably thinking. Even if you're telling the truth, I do not owe trans people my respect. I can tolerate them, but I am not obliged to acknowledge their experienced gender identity, and they shouldn't expect me to conform to their ideals. I mean, sure, you're not obliged to respect them, or anyone for that matter, but I have to ask, why? Genuinely. After everything I've gone over in this video so far, and explained how trans people are in their right to be seen as the gender they truly are, what is the point of not wanting to acknowledge their gender identity? I'm sorry, but at that point, people are in their right to call you a jerk. Not because you refuse to conform to someone else's ideals, but because you're being willfully ignorant about the validity of trans people. At this point, I can only assume the reason people continue to deny the validity of trans people is because they're scared. Scared to live among trans people in a society that tolerates them, and the implications behind such a scenario. Want to know what development in US history this closely resembles? Fucking racism. For the longest time, our country saw black people as mere property. It was legal to own living and breathing human beings, make them do unpaid labor, and even physically abuse them. It was the only way work got done in the United States. And that only ended when a bunch of people, including our 16th president, woke the hell up and realized that black people are human beings with autonomy just like us. When slavery ended and black people were finally allowed to live alongside us, guess what? There were still problems. They lived among us, but they didn't have the same rights as us. We weren't allowed to be in the same public spaces, we weren't allowed to marry each other, and black people could not vote. This was said to make us separate but equal. The separate part is already stupid, but you can't even say we're equal if they weren't even allowed to vote like us. Racism was so bad that every time steps were taken to end it, America moved the goalpost to limit the humanity of black people as much as possible. Thankfully, segregation ended in 1965, but the fact that happened at all illustrates a point I'm trying to make. Transphobes will often try to convince you that transphobia isn't a phobia, and should be differentiated from other forms of discrimination because they actually have a valid reason to not like trans people. That being, trans people are only pretending to be a certain gender, and thus have no reason to complain about facing pushback for a delusion they chose to pursue. But where there's discrimination, there's always justification. Homosexuality? Being attracted to the same sex is unnatural. Women? They're not as intelligent as men and thus shouldn't be allowed to vote. Black people? They're not human. They are property meant to do our manual labor. Fuck, even left-handed people were seen as darkspawn for centuries. And if you're thinking to yourself, but this is different, trans people are clearly not right, then A, you haven't been paying attention, and B, you're wrong. It's no different. You have to understand that these awful thoughts about minorities were baked into humanity's psyche. It doesn't matter if those views seem outdated and obviously false now, they were common sentiments back then, viewed as universal truths, and thus it was okay to be discriminatory. While bigotry is still present in today's world, it is thankfully much more condemned than it was back then. In order to stop treating others like dirt, to learn to live among them, in order to stop being so afraid of them, humans had to learn a crucial skill: tolerance. Because that's the thing. Even after humanity learned that other marginalized groups were no different from them and should be treated fairly, it was still tough to unlearn all of the nasty things that were previously thought about them. It was hard to learn to be comfortable around them. And after hearing me explain how trans people are valid and there's zero room to deny that, you likely have the same fear. What does it mean to tolerate trans people? It's quite simple, really. Acknowledge their gender identity, be nice to them like you would anyone else. If you make a mistake, apologize. They'll likely understand that this is all new to you and will be happy to correct you. And if you feel like they don't pass as their gender, don't tell them that. A lot of people are still in the middle of their journey and are trying their absolute hardest. All trans people want are to be treated like normal human beings, and that can only happen once people realize gender congruence is a real thing. I'm almost done. Let's go over the next anti-trans rhetoric. Trans people are not asking for human rights. They're asking for special privileges. Just so you know, there's a lot of instances where trans people are, in fact, treated as less than human. And when trans people say they want basic rights, they mean it. I'll get into that later, but for now, let's go over these so-called special privileges. Because realistically, it's only ever in reference to one thing: the bathrooms. I'll be the first to admit that this one's a little tricky. Yet once you've really thought about it, there's not too much to worry about. But if you're really adamant about not sharing a bathroom with a trans person, just know that gender-neutral bathrooms exist as a middle ground solution. We have these in my university. No urinals and very tall stalls. They're present on the first floor of the building that almost all of my classes have taken place in. Even though I often use these bathrooms at the same time as opposite genders, I have encountered zero issues. These bathrooms exist as a space for gender non-conforming people to do their business without worrying about affirmation. Anyways, while I get being uncomfortable about sharing a bathroom with someone that doesn't share your birth sex, I think this just comes down to humanity needing to learn to be tolerant of trans people. Just like how we stopped separating bathrooms by race back then. The sooner we stop worrying about sharing bathrooms with trans people, the sooner we can all laugh when we look back at the fact that we once argued about this at all. For starters, think about this from the perspective of a trans person. Depending on how far along they are in their transition, it would be pretty unfair to tell them to use the bathroom that matches their birth sex, because chances are they would no longer be accepted there if they pass too much as their experienced gender identity. You must also understand that trans people aren't stupid, and they understand the repercussions of walking to a restroom that opposes their birth sex. Trans people don't just start walking into different bathrooms once they realize they're trans. It's a huge leap of faith, and they only take that leap once they feel like they actually belong in those bathrooms. Or if they feel like they no longer belong in the bathroom that they used to use. And if there's ever a case where they feel like they don't belong in either bathroom and are just too unsure of the image they're presenting, allow me to reiterate: gender-neutral bathrooms exist. That way, no one has to feel uncomfortable. If you're about to say that trans people only are trying to get into different bathrooms so they can creep on people, I want you to realize how absolutely stupid that sounds. Who in their right mind would go through gender-affirming care in bad faith without experiencing gender dysphoria just to make it easier to creep on people? Even if anyone was stupid enough to try, I guarantee you that gender-affirming practitioners would be able to see through their bad intentions right away. Do you realize how much easier it would be for genuine bad actors to creep on people in bathrooms? There are shoddy ways to disguise yourself, like putting on a wig or hiding your face or something. Actually, do you think creeps would even try to pretend? Like they wouldn't just walk into a bathroom and grape someone who is alone and vulnerable. Hell, what makes you think cisgender people aren't capable of even graping people of the same sex in their own bathrooms? Humanity is diverse, and we need to realize that certain things are neither mutually exclusive nor intertwined. If a trans person ends up being a creep, the focus should be on them as a person rather than the fact that they're transgender. But if we're really concerned about statistics, you'll find that most sex offenders are, in fact,
a straight white man.
I understand you're concerned about your right to privacy, but the reality is that policing transgender people's bathroom usage does more harm than good. Because as it turns out, trans people are statistically way more likely to be victims of harassment in public restrooms than cis people. This risk further increases when they are forced to use the bathroom that matches their birth sex. Lots of transgender people will actually outright avoid using public restrooms due to fear of harassment. Hell, even outside of bathrooms, trans people are statistically very likely to be victims of rape compared to cis people. This policing is really harmful to cis people as well, because transphobes are so confident in their ability to always tell when someone is trans that they actually end up harassing cis people who are simply gender non-conforming. So if a trans person does pass as their experienced gender identity, and they choose to use the bathroom that aligns with said experienced gender identity, what's the problem with sharing that space with them? As far as you're concerned, they are what they say they are, and you will correctly see them as their experienced gender identity. So everyone does their business, and you can stop thinking about trans people's genitals, because that's fucking weird. The statistics don't support the idea that trans people harass others in gendered spaces. Quite the opposite, actually. By now, I hope you're starting to see a pattern. every bad assumption you've ever had about trans people is not only rooted in lies, but further inspection reveals that trans people are almost always the victims of something horrible in every talking point surrounding them. This is not an accident. Here's the truth. Trans people have been part of our society for a long time, never posing an issue, and they've started to become more visible thanks to major health organizations gaining a better understanding of them and what they need. On paper, having medical professionals and scientists validate your existence should serve as a giant step towards facing less discrimination. But that's not what happened. Instead, bigots identified the next vulnerable minority and created a hysteria that ended up being louder than anything a health professional could say.
These same people spewing the idea that, white men are the greatest domestic terror threat. It's like, I don't know, guys. Like, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, it's the radical trans that have killed. It feels like they've done practically every mass shooting in America for the last few years, but we're not allowed to talk about it. I can't name, including probably like Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, a group that is more violent per capita than the radical trans movement. I'm sure there's plenty that we don't even know about because they wouldn't release the manifesto like they didn't, in Wisconsin or
Nashville.
And chances are, if you're on the fence about trans people, this hysteria got to you first. Say you consider voting for Trump because he alerted you to the existence of a demographic whose only goal was to infringe on your rights by pretending to be a different gender. Do you do your own research, or do you fall for his propaganda and give him the extra vote that he baited out of you? Sadly, for most people, it's the latter. The economy, international affairs, literally any other quality in a president that would be way more important is ignored in favor of fear-mongering. Wake up! Trans people never wanted special privileges. Instead, their actual human rights have never been more at risk. I need you to understand what trans rights actually means. For starters, red states are cracking down on banning gender-affirming care. Trans people living in these states will not be able to conform to their experienced gender identity, which puts their mental health at extreme risk, including potential suicide. Because parents are allergic to improving the well-being of their kids for some reason, and can't stand the idea of gender dysphoria being a very real thing. Does that truly look like it aligns with the rights narrative of protecting the children? Oh, does that still not count as violating human rights for you? Then try this one on for size. Because of the false narrative that trans people are mentally unwell, the Department of Justice seeks to ban the ability for trans people to own guns in the United States. Look, I don't like guns at all, but the fact remains that the ability to bear arms is one of our constitutional rights. Not only is this a deliberate example of stripping rights away from trans people, this is a disgusting attempt to make them more vulnerable, as despite being about 1% of the US population, trans people are 4 times as likely to be victims of violence. The right to bear arms exists for the purpose of defending yourself, but America doesn't even want to grant that right to the most vulnerable demographic in their country. This plays into the myth of trans terrorism. Like I said earlier, the right pushed hard to get everyone to believe that a transgender person was responsible for killing Charlie Kirk. They are pushing an active narrative that transgender people are violent extremists, all of them. The very act of being transgender means that you are a terrorist. The Trump administration has been calling on the FBI to make it official. All transgender people will be designated as terrorists. This is not okay. Trans terrorism claims are extremely disprovable. Of the 5,000 mass shootings in America's history, only 5 of them were trans. Even accounting for per capita, you'll find that trans people are actually less violent than cis people on average. In fact, the Department of Justice actually removed a study from their databases that revealed something interesting. The overwhelming majority of terrorist acts in America are actually carried out by cisgender male right-wing extremists. Okay, so these next 3 pieces of news came up after I had already finished the script. First piece of news. The White House just revealed the United States counterterrorism strategy, which targets cartels, Islamist terrorist groups, Antifa, and anyone who is anti-American or, get this, radically pro-transgender. We will use all the tools constitutionally available to us to map them at home, identify their membership, map their ties to international organizations like Antifa, and use law enforcement to cripple them operationally before they can maim or kill the innocent. There's no mentioning here of right-wing extremism, by the way. which, you know, is the actual crux of most acts of terrorism in the United States, like we discussed a moment ago. Regardless, I'm not sure how much weight this counterterrorism strategy actually holds, but it would technically mean that I'm a target for even releasing this video. Second piece of news. Trump's Department of Justice recently tried to access hospital records of patients who received gender-affirming care in Rhode Island. This would give them access to patient addresses and social security numbers, all to protect children from chemical and surgical mutilation. Thankfully, a federal judge blocked this order because they're seeing the same writing on the wall as hopefully the rest of us do. This is bullshit. Third piece of news. The Department of Justice is getting a children's hospital in Texas to establish a detransition clinic. This is beyond asinine. If I'm reading the writing on the wall correctly, they might force trans people in Texas to detransition against their will. It really lines up with the previous piece of news, them wanting the personal information of people who have transitioned. Look, like I said, trans people are not a new thing, but it doesn't change the fact that they might be new to you. And the unfamiliar can be frightening. But your first reaction should not be to shun and marginalize them. It should be to learn. And hopefully by watching this video, you have indeed learned. Being transgender was never an ideology. It's a real thing. The science supports the idea that they're the gender they claim to be. And that isn't any less true just because they don't share your genitals or experiences growing up. They are not infringing on your rights by existing, and they never have for all these years. So let them exist and learn to live alongside them. And for Christ's sake, don't vote to take away their support systems just because you're scared of sharing a bathroom with them. You're not saving children, you're killing them! Most of all, now is the time for you to open your eyes and see what's going on here. Every single fear you've ever had about them was perpetrated by a government who couldn't give less of a shit about the validity of their existence, or yours for that matter. Their only goal is to marginalize and dehumanize, exert power by oppressing an extremely vulnerable group, use them as a scapegoat for the wrongs of our nation, and spread enough fear so that no one takes them seriously anymore, with the goal of eventually weeding them out of our country. Actually, all of this marginalization is reminiscent of early stages of a potential genocide. If you've made it this far into the video, please don't allow this to continue. If I can convince even one person to stop being afraid of trans people, then it will be such a boon to a community that needs all the help they can get. And if you know others who are on the fence, I implore you to share this video with them as well. Your hate is unfounded. It's time to spread the message, and that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching.